Welcome to my Bob Thurman podcast. I'm so grateful some good friends enabled me to present them to you. If you enjoy them and find them useful, please think of becoming a member of Tibet House US to help preserve Tibetan culture. Tibet House is the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America. All best wishes. Have a great day.
This is episode 294, Gun Violence in America.
We're here at a time of grim awareness, another mass shooting, several, but particularly this one is particularly poignant in Uvalde, I think, Texas, where they have a particularly reprehensible governor and a reprehensible senator. And actually, starting this weekend, there will be an NRA thing there, both with Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, two of the worst malefactors, and celebrating guns, in spite of a young, demented young man who marched into a school in primarily Latino students. He himself is a Latino, therefore fully demented, and nobody knows why. There's no note, or I haven't heard of anything. And this is a town where there is a SWAT team, where 40% of the budget of the town goes for beefing up the police, where they're highly armed. And this kid, poor, sad, tragic, demented kid, shot off his gun for 12 minutes outside the school and then marched into a fortified school that had a special fence around it and was supposedly, hardened. Because the reason I'm mentioning those terms is because we're hearing already from the idiots who think who misunderstand the Second Amendment and think everybody should be armed to the teeth, and they're going to say if the teachers in the school classrooms had guns, they would have shot the kid down. So that would have solved the problem. Everybody should be armed. And this is the NRA message, and the NRA is paid by the gun manufacturers to promote this and lobby for this. They become a lobbying organization for more gun sales, more gun spread. And the police refused to go in when the shooter was in, and he was in the school for 1 hour. And he killed numbers of students and wounded numbers more. I think 22 wounded, 19 killed, or I forgot. Unbelievable. One mother was begging the cops, who were a bunch of cops outside while he was inside, and they refused to go in because they might get shot, although they were highly armed themselves. But they didn't know where the kid was, whatever. They didn't want to charge in and get shot. So he shot all the students and the teachers that he could. I mean, really. So when the Abbott and the other reprehensible people there say, you see, if everybody had a gun, which was an Archie Bunker line, that everyone should have a gun, and even everybody in the airplane would have one, and no one could hijack an airplane. Because everybody would be armed. When you got your boarding pass, they gave you a gun. That was an Archie Bunker thing. I mean, really. And we really should be more clear about this. First of all, the most important people at the moment are the people who got killed, because they are in the bardo. This will not be on the news. Either Christians will be sort of thinking of them as in a bardo in the hopes that they will be hoping that Jesus will be helping them out, and that these innocent children will be going to heaven. So in a way, they have them in a bardo, but they're praying and they're miserable because of their loss of human life, which they have every right to be. And they're also missing them themselves. They love them. And they're the second most important, are the bereaved people. And they're grief-stricken. They're angry at the whole system that enabled this to happen. They're angry with the cops who didn't, for all their armament and so on, they did eventually go and shoot the kid. But they still didn't go and right away when they knew it was happening. And although this supposedly was a hardened thing, was 40%. I read in my beloved Heather Cox Richardson Substack blog, I read that 40% of the town's budget had to do with beefing up the police in that town. And making them more military trained and so on, but they still were not trained, or they didn't have enough bulletproof vests or whatever it was. They wouldn't assault the kid immediately. And one mother disobeyed them, jumped over the fence, ran into the school, found her 2 kids, and ran out with them. That's a happy mother now, although of course it's completely, the whole community is in total tragedy mode because of all the death and the needless stupidity behind it, and the feeling that they are conditioned to feel that there's nothing they can do about it. Everyone thinks there's nothing that can be done. But actually there are only 50 people maximum, maybe a few on both sides. There's 50 people, the Republican senators, who make it impossible for it to be done. Some of the bad Democratic ones too hide behind the fact that they get filibustered if they do a bill. The House immediately, where you have a clear Democratic majority, they immediately pass the bill, because the point is, this is not party politics, you have to understand, because the Republican Party is no longer a political party. You've got to understand that in order to do something about this. The Republican Party has a political party. When they're in the minority, they are what's called a loyal opposition for a democracy to function. A loyal opposition means that they govern and they do what's needed for the people, even though they are not getting the full credit they think, although individuals can, if they propose and do and execute good ideas. But they are loyal and they are opposed, but they govern. Because their main realization, they take an oath of office. I take this to serve the Constitution, the government of the United States, and the good faith and good credit of the government of the United States. And these people have been since Reagan, actually since Goldwater, but he never won. The Goldwater types from the 60s didn't win, but finally they did win under Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan's first line was, he opened his campaign in a southern state, in the town where they murdered civil rights activists during the civil rights movement. And he talked about states' rights. And his whole job, and the job of the business people who funded him from the 50s, they funded him as far back as the 50s, to prevent the government's ability to protect labor unions, to regulate business. And they funded him, and their strategy was to take over state legislatures and prevent the government from regulating either the states or all kinds of things, but particularly also the businesses. And around the same time, the NRA stopped resisting the gun manufacturers' funding for lobbying purposes, which they had adamantly refused long back. They represented hunters, sports shooters, and they in no way wanted everybody to have guns. the NRA, when it was founded in the 19th century. They were not into it. They knew about the John Birch Society. They knew about the Ku Klux Klan. They didn't want to have the whole country armed. The right to bear arms amendment even. Well, no, let me finish this one. But you must, you read Heather Cox Richardson on this. Look up her last few Substacks postings, and she makes it very clear. And I'm not remembering very well. She's so wonderful, great history teacher who is there teaching us all through those blogs. It's amazing. But anyway, so then the whole job was to weaken the government. So they're not a loyal opposition as long as they can get enough people, even if they're in the opposition, that's to say in the minority, they can block the majority from serving the people. They do not take seriously, actually there seems to be no mechanism in the Constitution to remove a congressperson or a senator or a judge who breaks their oath of office. Actually, I don't know what the judge's oath of office is. I do know the senator and the congressperson and the president's oath of office, and they say that they are there to support the government. That's their job, and that's their oath. And they take this freely and without reservation or purpose of evasion. That's in the vow, in the oath. So when they evade their responsibility to protect the government and to exercise the duties of the government, they are breaking their oath of office. For example, every single Republican senator and many Democratic ones signed the Grover Norquist Americans for Tax Reform pledge that they wouldn't raise taxes for the federal government no matter what. And therefore you've seen these daring each other to go bankrupt, to bankrupt the government and to throw the government into receivership, unable to pay the national debt and so on. Even though the national debt is a fake thing because the dollar is the medium of exchange in the world and you can print as many as you need to. So it's kind of a fake thing, actually. It's just a borrowing from the future, really, is what it is. And that's, of course, irresponsible, and they shouldn't do it as much as they do. And actually, the ones who are trying to destroy the government, who will use the argument against the majority, which have been the Democrats, by saying you can't afford it, you don't want to make, you have to balance the budget and do all these things like that. And the minute they win and have the presidency or have a majority in the Congress, they run up the deficit. Reagan ran it up. W. Bush ran it up like crazy. Trump ran it up hugely, but tax cuts for the rich. Because their whole thing, they're funded by the rich and by businesses and corporations to prevent the federal government's ability to control their predatory behavior, squeezing the poor people, driving them greater into poverty, concentrating the wealth in the hands of zillions of millionaires and hundreds of billionaires. Perhaps up to 1,000 nowadays, you could track it. When Reagan came in, there were 17 billionaires. And now there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Because even the Democrats, even Clinton, for example, gave up trying to fight them. Because he didn't really announce it. They were too cowardly. Him and Obama were basically, and Carter didn't have time because Reagan's people cheated Carter. That's how they got in. They cheated by offering weapons to the Iranians to keep the hostages. That is, they've committed treason in order to win because they are not a political party, you understand. They're a movement on the part of the super wealthy, the American oligarchs, corporate oligarchs and individual oligarchs, to cripple and destroy the power of the federal government so that the federal government cannot fine them, cannot tax them, cannot control them. And they confuse the people into thinking that the federal government is doing bad things to them, whereas they are doing the bad things. And the federal government, with the New Deal, Roosevelt, after they did this before in the Gilded Age, and they ended up in the Roaring 20s, bankrupting and wrecking the entire world economy, like they almost did again in 2008 now. recently, and they were on the edge of it even now still. When that happened, there was such a catastrophe that they couldn't prevent the government from coming back with Roosevelt. And then Roosevelt's New Deal took them under control, taxed them. In the war, they were taxed, and after the war in the 50s, they had a 90% tax over a certain number of millions. 90%, not 27 or 22%, and with all loopholes and lawyers and accountants paying nothing. 90% of taxes they paid. They're still millionaires, many. I don't think any billionaires, maybe, at that time. And who needs $1 billion? You can't spend it. You can't deal with it. You just hire a bunch of people to manage it. You become like a government yourself, institution, stressed out all the time, worrying about all those resources and you hire people you don't know if you can trust to manage them for you. It's a useless thing to be a billionaire, in a way. Although among billionaires there are some good ones, don't get me wrong. There are a few who are trying to use that in the right way, although, in fact, they haven't been effective so far against the dark money billionaires. Okay, so the point is, it's not that we're helpless. We can control this gun thing. For example, one of the figures I learned today, there were 400,000 AR-15 assault-type rifles in 1994, when after some problems, there was a bill, I think the Brady bill, there was a banning of assault rifles to be sold to the population in general. Military have them for war, but they are for war. They are not for peace. They're not for hunting. They are not for sport. They are just for attacking. So there were 400,000 in the country, which is too many, a lot, but that's how they were. For 10 years, that number didn't much change, because they were banned, but they only made it, the people who got that bill through in 1994 only got it was a 10-year long ban. It's expired in 2004, and that's the W. Bush time. So the Congress, and with a majority, Republican majority in the Congress, so they didn't renew it. There are now 20 million of those guns in the country, is the figure I learned this morning. 20 million military assault rifles in the civilian population in the United States. And then they fall into the hands of a demented kid, like the one in Uvalde, Texas, and he goes and shoots for 50 people. The other guy, the worst one, right, was the guy who didn't like the country music. It wasn't even rock music. Country music thing in Las Vegas, and wormed his way into a hotel and killed hundreds. Not that long ago. It's like, I'm smiling because it's so asinine. And completely, nowhere else in the world does this happen. Because our democracy has been compromised. We are in a fascist state. What we fought, and the people who are most gung-ho about it, the MAGA people, who are most confused about it, because one of the phenomena in that kind of a state is that some complete diddly-bop person will become the leader by shouting a lot of lies. And the wealthy people will buy the media time, so the media will never really speak openly and honestly. Even CNN doesn't. They don't really speak the environment. They don't really deal with the catastrophe being inflicted upon us and the whole world's people by these bad people. And it's just that was the guy who was a bad businessman, a spoiled brat, narcissist, unfortunate, sad childhood that he had, by a crazy Nazi father. His father was a member of the Nazi Party, and not the German Nazi Party. He was kicked out of Germany because he wouldn't serve in the German army. His father was, grandfather, but he was American. But he was a Nazi. It was a party in America in the 30s, before we went into Roosevelt took us into the war. People don't know that. It was big enough to fill Madison Square Garden in New York, where Trump's father was arrested, because they were having like a riot afterwards out in the street after their rally for Nazism. Okay? So this guy who comes from a Nazi family, American Nazi family, Mr. Drumpf, he was a bad business person, so he was bankrupt from the 80s, and no local banks would lend him any money. So the Russians channeled their Russian oligarchs chanted their ill-gotten gains to him because he helped them launder their money to buy overpriced apartments in New York and Panama and wherever else he built his crappy buildings, with loans from which they channeled to him through the Cyprus Bank and the Deutsche Bank. And he got these loans. And he's been their asset, therefore, financial asset, for 30 years by the time he was running, or 35 years, since the 80s. And it's not a matter of there was a conspiracy or somebody peed on him in a bed in Moscow, or he had a contract going with Putin to build a skyscraper in Moscow, one of his crappy buildings there. It wasn't a matter of that or a memo or whatever, or Manafort, although those were all very real. He was a long-term asset of theirs that anybody can see who if their media would make this really clearly available, without pretense and without not bothering to mention this and that. So we're under that condition, and one of the big players there are the gun manufacturers. 20 million AR-15 rifles sold at a high price to 20 million people. That's pretty good money. And every time somebody's shot down, they should be sued. And that would change the whole thing. And the federal government, if they had a loyal opposition that we would govern, they could very quickly fix this. There was a show about Australia on Link TV, Amy Goodman, where they had a horrible mass shooting in Australia 20 years ago. And within 3 weeks, a conservative, prime minister, changed the whole gun laws, and they haven't had one single mass shooting since in Australia for the last almost 30 years now. So you can change these things. It isn't that you can't do anything. You can easily change it. This is what you have to know. Even my beloved friend, local journalist, radio journalist, Joe Donahue from Albany, from AWAMC, he had on, unfortunately all too briefly, a man who has written a book called How to Repeal the Second Amendment. So this sort of sacred right to bear arms has been twisted and misunderstood. It was actually a bill that was put in by slave owners, is the key thing, an amendment, to make sure they kept their militia. And it's what is called a collective right. So members of a militia, that means like the National Reserve, the reserve arm, the reserve soldiers, like who've been sent to Iraq and Afghanistan lately by the bad W. Bush stolen Republican presidency in 2000 from Al Gore in Florida, and by violent demonstration preventing vote counting, which should be well known, but it is known enough, but not well known enough. And you wouldn't know, it wouldn't make any impact even if they would publish it now, because the conspiracy lies are so many that people would think it was some kind of made-up thing. People are just so confused. They can't understand. They think there is no truth because there's been so much lying. That's part of one of the strategies of fascists, to tell such lies. Like Hitler told everybody that everybody wanted to destroy Germany, because they had lost a war 30 years before. So therefore they should attack everybody. Putin is telling the Russians now that the Ukrainians and the NATO want to attack them. And so then he attacks them. And actually W. Bush started this, we should admit. He attacked Iraq without being provoked. Yeah, he was no good, bad dictator, formally supported by our own CIA against Iran. For a long time, an ally actually, but a bad leader, of course, cruel and despot. But nevertheless, they didn't attack us at 9/11. The Saudis had done that. The people were Saudis on those planes, not Iraqis. And there was no reason, and then it pretended he had nuclear weapons. He did not have nuclear weapons. And there were international inspectors who didn't find them and said, no, he doesn't have them. So it was another lie told to us. And that started the idea of preemptive attacking people, which had been a no-no since the end of the Second World War. So that gave Putin his idea. So, and then didn't stop him, never mind, anyway, didn't stop him in Syria. Then they destroyed that whole country. We just let that happen. And so we can easily do this. If we had a loyal opposition, or if we had a filibuster-proof majority, or even if we had a thin majority where there weren't some traitorous, really Republican in mind or anti-government people in mind who are part of the oil industry and the dark money, such as Sinema and Manchin. And there are a few others hiding behind them, apparently. There may be 4 or 5 others in the Democratic Party. So it's not really Republican and Democrat. It's not politics. I'm not talking politics here. I'm talking the insight that the oligarchic, money aristocratic forces have used their money as dark money to destroy the government since, and have been empowered to do it with only, faltering opposition since 1980, since the victory of Reagan in 1980, who didn't come in to develop the federal government, came in to destroy it, actually. Openly said so. That's why they elected him. And it's like in the same sense that the slave owners wanted to destroy the Union when the Union wanted to take away their slaves. Lincoln's father was a person who was a single-person farmer without slaves, with only hired labor, could not compete with slave plantations. So Lincoln had it in his DA that slave plantation was a bad concentration of wealth, which made democracy impossible, created an oligarchic rule, and therefore defended the Union and did so effectively, fortunately. But it's an endless thing that people who are, the corporations became, in a way, the slave owners, the equivalent of the slave owners. And of course, they used and pumped up the myth of the lost cause of the Southern Confederacy. That's why these people run around with the Confederate battle flag, to destroy the Union. Okay? But the Union is what helped us. There's a final thing I'll mention in this one. Pointed out to me by my eldest son, a wonderful article, but hard to find. But a strategist for the beginnings of the takeover of the Republican Party. By the way, Lincoln was a Republican. So I have absolutely nothing against the Republican Party as a Democratic Party. It no longer is a Democratic Party, I have to understand. Maybe McCloskey, maybe the guy from Utah, the former presidential candidate who talked about the takers and the makers, who voted for a little bit of this and that, when it was clear it wouldn't go through, actually, only. So it's not a political party anymore. It's the Confederacy. It's the oligarchs. It's the people who want to squeeze you poor people, we poor people, I'm just a professor, they want to squeeze us. Everything, blood out of a stone of our poverties, our non-billionaires. That's what it is. And it's there to obstruct the government. 106, we talk about 9/11, everybody knows what it is. We should also know, everybody should know 106. 106 is when they tried to overthrow. And actually there was another one we should celebrate like that, or we should remember like that, which was when the Republicans blocked the vote counting in Miami-Dade County, which would have turned up a majority for Gore in Florida, which would have given him the presidency, he was the environmental president, would have started working on the environment 22 years ago, actively, and would not have invaded oil countries, would not have gone out and become used the military for the oil companies. If had 9/11 happened, might have done some police action against the criminal bin Laden conspiracy, which was a Saudi conspiracy, actually, funded by Saudis, Bin Laden was a Saudi, and all his people were Saudis, not Iraqi and not Afghani. Would have been a police action, maybe he would have, but he wouldn't have invaded and occupied Afghanistan or Iraq. And he would have put that huge money, trillions that we wasted, he would have put wrecking those countries. He would have put that into climate change amelioration, adaptation. He would have challenged the oil industry, the dark money, the dark source of the dark money. We would be way ahead on the planet with your typhoons and hurricanes that are ripping your MAGA hats off your heads, and the tornadoes, and the floods that are ruining your crops, flooding your pickup trucks. And you can't, AR-15 can't help you with floods and tornadoes, can you? So the Second Amendment should be repealed or amended to say this is only for the militia is allowed to bear arms. Civilians are not allowed to bear arms. But they can have arms, bear arms in a military sense. I'm an arm-bearing person. They're not a military, they're civilians. They can have a hunting rifle. They can have a target shooting sports pistol. But they can't, some of them might be grabbed by some crazy kid and going somewhere, and they'd be flicking the bolt and shooting a little bit with a low caliber gun, and they would harm some people, but not 20s and 40s and hundreds of them. So that should be amended. And immediately there should be a banning of assault weapons again. They should be turned back in. And I think it's unfair almost to some of the individual citizens who bought them out of fear. And maybe there should be some buyback, forced penalizing, few billions penalized. What does one of those things cost? Must be one, let's say it's $1,000. It might be $2,000. I don't know, but let's say it's 1,000. Take 1,000 by 20 million. So then add a zero. That's 10,000 times 2 million. So it's 10,000 2 millions. So 20,000 1 millions. So that's 20,000 is 4 zeros. Add 6 zeros to that. That's 10 zeros. That's 20 billion. $20 billion. So find them 10 billion, or take back all of it. But it was not illegal. Find them 10 billion for irresponsibility. They could have put various things where they couldn't be used, or magazines. I mean, there are ways they could have even done something. But anyway, find them half of that profit, and then buy back the guns, or subsidize the buybacks of all the guns, not to penalize the poor, frightened people. You could do it in a nice way instead of punishing individuals. And then take those 20 million guns right off the street, and that'd be great. Save your budget for your Pentagon. Give them back to don't destroy them, give them back to the Pentagon. They can then use them in wartime, in armories. Keep them in an armory and use them in case there is a war. And then they would hand them out to reserve troops, and reserve troops can keep them in an armory. That's very sensible. And then the 90% of people, and then expose the filibusterers, the disloyal opposition, and then put an amendment in the Constitution that acts that can be proven to be breaking the oath of office, acts such as signing the Grover Norquist pledge that they will not raise taxes for any reason for the government, because that is not upholding the faith and good credit of the Constitution and the government of the United States. That's bankrupting the Union. Grover Norquist has openly said he wants to destroy the government. He doesn't just want to trim it. He has openly said that. He sometimes changes when he's challenged. Pretends, I just mean to cut it back to, or it can interfere with my paylords of Charles Koch and Robert Mercer and these kind of billionaire oligarchs who have cleverly bought the government through controlling the minority party. Final thing I want to say, my son, a wonderful son, Condon, he said that he read an article, he explained an article that from FDR, the New Deal which Biden is trying to make a New Deal, because we need one, because we had basically 1929 in 2008, but we bailed the banks and we stopped it from being world, but it was very destructive. And there's this huge debt still lying around here and there because of it still, that could overwhelm us actually easily. So it needs to be managed very carefully. We're teetering, you could say. It's really serious. And but they managed it better, you know. And he's trying to do a New Deal. Well, anyway, New Deal turned out to be what the Republican strategists who wrote this article, or rather, the takeover the Republican Party strategists who wrote this article. He said they have Santa Claus, the New Deal social system, the welfare system is Santa Claus. So the government is Santa. So they will always win elections, and there's no way to fight them other than to compete with them to do things for the people, which is what, of course, a political party should be doing. But they don't want to do that because they're working for the oligarchs. So they created what they call tax cut Santa Claus. So they used the fake idea of tax cuts, and then used that with the sort of regular people like salary earners like me, thinking, oh, I get $1,000 back, or I don't have to pay like 30% or something, or 20% from my like $80,000 salary or something. You know, I get back for $2,000 or $3,000, so that's great. Tax cuts, that's okay, I'll vote for that. But meanwhile, the ones who are really getting the tax cuts are the billionaires. When you have $1 billion tax bill because you have $100 billion, well, that means you have like $10 or $15 billion. Then you get a $5 or $10 billion or even a total tax cut. Keep your $100 billion. But anyway, it sounds good, so they call it tax cut Santa Claus versus social system tax Santa Claus. Quite brilliant in its own way. You know, Mussolini, Berlusconi, Putin, the fascist dictators can be amusing when they're dancing every day. But they're just terrible liars, and they destroy the lives of the people of the countries they rule. And their neighbors, because they have to deflect resentment by making war on other people. Because their greed knows no bounds. So democracies are safer when they're real democracies, when you have a loyal opposition. They lose the election. They then think, what can we do more for the people that would make them vote us in next time? What are these people not doing right? Where are they making it wrong? And then they can do that. But meanwhile, we govern. We show we're already ready to do it. And that's a loyal opposition. Okay, and that's what we need. And if we had that right now, or 15 or 20 mass shootings, 500 mass shootings, I think there are 3,500 a year in the country. I think that's a figure. There have been thousands since 2004. And that we would put a bill through right away and clean up this gun mess. And then some demented kid like that, maybe he'd go in there with a knife, might knife somebody. He might do something bad, might beat somebody over the head with something. Still might kill somebody and himself. He was obviously clear wanting to kill himself. And they're not telling us what drugs he was on, which stupid psychiatrist put him on what drug that make you crazy, or which one didn't say he is crazy and shouldn't be going to school or whatever. I don't know why he killed kids, really, we don't know. And they could find out and tell us, but they clearly won't. Just like they let the police pretend they had defended everybody when the police actually had been completely incompetent, actually, as heavily armed as they were. They were incompetent. So I'm sorry to talk about this, but this is the thing for the day. We have to clearly think. Please read Heather Cox Richardson's blog. It's free. There's a paywall if you want like more extra, if you this and that, but she gives it all away to everybody. She's a real history teacher. You take your American history class properly with her. Please do. And don't listen to Fox News. The man is lies. He's a complete liar. There should be a rule also that media cannot brainwash people. There was a rule up to Reagan. Reagan canceled what was called the Fairness Doctrine, where you can't express opinion unless there's a counter-opinion in the same moment, the same program, someone actually challenging what you just said, like fact-checking you right in your face. So that stops propaganda. He canceled that. It took him a few years once he got in, but he saw to that being canceled, so there could be propaganda. And then the Murdoch people have enriched themselves by brainwashing people to confuse them, telling lies, and then you can't just pick out the truth when there's so many different lies and conspiracy theories. That's on purpose. In fact, there are conspiracies. They were doing a conspiracy. They have been. It's called The Dark Money. You can read Jane Mayer's book called Dark Money. Wonderful, honest journalist. Dark Money. Had to defy assault by the dark money people, the Koch brothers, to write the book. Okay, so that's the homework from this blog I'm doing. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm only laughing because it seems ridiculous to me that we were a good, well-educated country enough. We had decent classes in our things. People didn't allow people like Fox News to tell you lies 12 hours a day. You know, with different people just lying and lying to you. And, you know, Trump's like media, the enemy of the people. Typical big lie technique. His own propagandizing media are your enemy. Yes, because they're lying to you and brainwashing you. But the regular media are trying to control abuses of power. That's the job of the Fourth Estate from the time of Thomas Jefferson. That's the time of what's called the Fourth Estate, is the journalists are supposed to keep tyrants in check and oligarchs so that people know what is being done around them and to them. And so they are the friends of the people, not the enemies of the people. But bad propagandists and brainwashers and liars are the enemies of the people, yes. But the big lie technique is to say what they are doing is being done by people who are not doing it. That's the way of confusing you. You understand? That's called the big lie. You believe it because you wouldn't think it would be. It's so preposterous, these lies, that you think nobody would dare say anything so preposterous. That's the whole big lie strategy, which was coined by I think the expression comes from Goebbels, who was Hitler's propagandist, who's reincarnated in Fox News right now. You should know that. It's fake. It's not news. It's Fox propaganda. Okay? So I know I had to give you some homework. I'm sorry. And Jesus and Avalokiteshvara and Krishna and all the saints and angels are working to help the poor people who were killed. And every time they get killed, they do work for them. So don't let your own lives be killed, those of you who are bereaved. Don't live with resentment and anger. Those lovely people who you loved, they were happy people. They were cheerful going to school. They were loving learning. And they loved you. And they were so happy to come home to you and show you what they learned. And they loved it when you were happy, when you were upset, angry, had fights in the household, something. They were unhappy. So don't be angry. You know, even the evil, crazy kid, don't hate the evil, crazy kid. You know, if he hadn't been shot by the cops, don't be sitting wanting to have him executed. I mean, maybe some of these people in some state will be executed where there is capital punishment. But, you know, that's not going to give you satisfaction. And it's not going to give your angelic departed one who will be in heaven and will be looking down that now your life has been embittered and you're poisoned and you're angry and you're hating. And that you shouldn't live like that. That's not the way to honor them. The way to honor them is grieve and get over it eventually, and not in a rush, and love others like you love the ones you lost. Okay? And love yourself like the one you loved you lost. Like the one you lost loved you. Love yourself like that. Which means be happy for their benefit, for their sake, as well as your own. Okay? And your neighbors and friends. Okay? And then joyfully vote for people who like democracy. And joyfully protest and speak out, vigorously but happily and humorously and joyfully, against the liars who are trying to wreck your protection, against them, which is actually the government for the most part. It's the dreamed of government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's the government. Lincoln, and your parents and grandparents, so many of the MAGA people, their parents and grandparents fought against people like the people now they are idolizing. They've become so confused. So try to help clarify their confusion. Speak out. Okay, yes, I know, that's enough. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to be vigorous today and a little bit critical. And I am cheery, though, in spite of it. If they kill me, I die cheery. That's my slogan, actually. We have to be happy. The only way we will have peace is we have to try to be so joyful and happy and be joyful about the good things in life that even if some crazy kills us, we'll die happy, and then we'll be reborn happy. We'll take happiness to heaven, if that's what you believe, We won't die angry. We won't die bitter. We won't leave behind bitterness. Okay? That's key. Okay, so cheer up and be happy. See you later.
This episode of the Robb Thurman podcast was originally recorded May 2022 at Menla Mountain Retreat and Dewa Spa in the heart of the Catskills. To learn more about the ongoing mission of Menla and Tibet House US to present and preserve Tibetan culture, please visit our websites at thus.org and menla.org. Your monthly contributions and membership donations help directly support this podcast, which is produced through a Creative Commons No Derivatives license. Please be sure to like, share, and repost on your favorite social media platforms. Music, as always, is generously supplied by Tenzing Chogyal. To learn more about the work and music of Tenzing Chogyal, please visit his website at tenzingchogyal.com. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.